Hi, this is an important video and will explain why the rich are actually happy and quite pleased about the loss of 40 million jobs and have absolutely no way going to try to remedy that. They like it the way it is. I'll explain that among other things. But this video is going to also explain why 40 million new jobs are needed by January 20, 2021. My name is Carl Pearson. I'm an attorney for many years. I went to Harvard Law School. I'm a high school dropout with no diploma, but I did graduate magna cum laude with a BA in 2.5 years. I've been a small business person since my paper route in Nebraska at age 9. I'm almost 84 years old, and I've been cooped up in the heart of the coronavirus in New York, for the past 73 days in an effort to live many years more. I now have the time to figure out what the next Congress and President will probably do when they take office on Inauguration Day, January 20, 2021, assuming, however, that the Democrats win control of both the House and the Senate, and that the Democratic nominee for president wins. I was born during the middle of the Great Depression, so I have no memory of that period, and I had to do some additional research to add to what little I already knew. I found a great 14-page article which tells you a lot of research detail about the federal employment programs during the Great Depression. The URL or link and the URL for another good source are contained in my description of this video. First, I'm going to describe these work programs and then describe what I think the new government should do. I refrain from saying administration because, as we now see, that term does not include Congress. To make a comparison, I need to tell you that the U.S. population in 1932 was 124,839,000, and the estimated population today is 332,650,000, which means that today the U.S. has 2.66 times the 1932 population. So I'm going to adjust the 1932 work program figures by the 2.66 factor. Also, you should know that unemployment rate in 1932 was 23.6%, and that I estimate the true unemployment rate in the U.S. today, and that's counting past unemployeds, the current 40 million or more with recent unemployment claims and a lot more coming, the terminated persons not allowed to make unemployment claims in some states, the underemployed, and the persons who have totally given up. And with all that, it's probably between 40 and 50%. Now, let's look at the federal work programs from 1932 to 1942 or so. They were the WPA, or Work Projects Administration, the CCC, or Civilian Conservation Corps, originally named the Emergency Conservation Work, the NYA, or National Youth Administration, the CUW, or Camps for Unemployed Women, and finally the Fish and Wildlife Service. These were the most important, and as adjusted at the peak, provided employment for 11 million persons of various types for varying periods, and came to an end by 1942 when war-related jobs became available. If you looked at the total number employed during the 10-year period, you would get an adjusted number of perhaps 5 times greater than 11 million, because the 11 million figure is a peak, but it was a 10-year period. So a lot of people, perhaps 55 million people, were helped and employed during that period. The WPA, or Works Project Administration, is the first one. The WPA by far was the largest of the federal New Deal work programs, and it was created by presidential order to put unemployed persons on welfare back to useful work at a reduced cost. The jobs had to be non-competitive with existing employment, as well as preserve the skills and self-respect of the persons to be employed. Workers received $50 a month, which averaged to 46 cents an hour. At its peak, meaning at the point of the greatest number of WPA employed persons, there were an adjusted 10,200,000 unemployed laborers, musicians, artists, and writers employed by the WPA in activities including the Federal Theater Project, the Federal Writers Project, and Federal Art Project. Projects had to be approved by a state WPA administrator and could not compete with the local private construction projects. Local relief recipients were hired by the WPA to build fences, clean up and salvage equipment from bankrupt farms, build roads, dig ditches, build water control structures, and construct buildings for WPA use. The men could choose whether to work or not, which made it more costly and difficult to adhere to construction schedules. The WPA hires were usually middle-aged to older men who could not support their families. By 1941, the threatened war caused the private job market to improve and private employment rate to go down, and the WPA dissolved in mid-1943. Next in line is the CCC, or Civilian Conservation Corps. As soon as President Roosevelt took office in January 1933, he made plans for the CCC, which was to put an adjusted 700,000 young men to work preserving the nation's forests and eroded farmlands while not competing with the local labor markets. The War Department built the camps and took care of running the camps, physical training, and transportation of workers to the lands being repaired. The local and later the federal Labor Department set up offices throughout the U.S. to recruit the unemployed single male workers ages 18 through 25. The Agriculture and Interior Departments developed work projects that emphasized the conservation of the nation's natural resources. Each worker was paid $30 per month, with $25 of that going to his family, which for most families was a doubling of their low monthly income otherwise. The U.S. Army built more than 2,600 camps during that period. About 300 types of work projects received approval, such as structural improvements to bridges, repairing roads and trails, elimination of predatory animals, stream improvement, stocking fish, making surveys, mosquito control, flood and erosion control, planting trees and nursery work, fighting forest fires, landscape and public picnic grounds, just to name some. Next in line is a much reduced number, is the CUW, or Camps for Unemployed Women. Women prior to World War II were not employed as often as men, and were more or less expected to maintain the home and care for the kids. There was, of course, some unemployment among women, and the Camps for Unemployed Women was created. A paltry 86 camps were created during 1934 through 1937, serving an adjusted total of 17,000 women between the ages of 18 and 25, but for 1 month each. Each was paid $5 for the month, and they lived in the YWCA and worked out their food and housing by working 56 to 70 hours per month on camp work projects, and were taught useful household skills such as home nursing, sewing, basketry, and painting, but not skills leading to a job. And finally, the Fish and Wildlife Service. In 1934, Congress passed the Migratory Bird Hunting Stamp Act of 1934, which is popularly known as the Duck Stamp Act, to provide funds for the acquisition of areas for use as migratory bird sanctuaries, refuges, and breeding grounds for the protection of certain migratory birds. An unprecedented 169 new refuges were created between 1933 and 1943, and in some cases dams and reservoirs were built to make the refuge more attractive to migrating fowl. Employees of the CCC, WPA, and NYA, working from new nearby campsites, prepared these lands in various ways to protect wildlife species and enable fowl to improve their chances of reaching their migratory destinations south of the U.S. Because of the Depression, farm bankruptcies, and massive unemployment, the costs of land and labor were exceedingly low. This enabled the substantially increased number of refuges to be maintained and improved. Some of the activities included recording nesting records and bird populations at various seasons, conditions of dams and other structures, repairing of signs and fences, the creation of duck food and cover plants, the planting of trees and bushes, the collection of plants and surplus seeds, patrolling the refuges during hunting seasons, the location and destruction of predators, and locating animals for use in laboratories. Now, I'm done describing the federal programs that put an adjusted 11 million people to work, or as many as an adjusted 55 million if you look at every single person who was employed by one of those programs during the 10-year period. Now, let's try to determine what the new Democratic-controlled Congress and Democratic President should do in preparation for and starting on January 20, 2021. 1. The unemployment rate is about twice as high now, mainly because of the pandemic and the addition of women to the labor market, as well as the lack of antitrust enforcement and consequential ever-increasing concentration of the economy, which is destroying the middle class and dramatically increasing poverty among the already poor and the newly poor. 2. 40 million to 50 million persons are now unemployed, and creating jobs for 40 million of them is a healthy beginning. 3. Various government agencies control specialized parts needed to employ that number as soon as possible, such as the military to provide vehicles, helicopters, and planes, the Army engineers for coastal work and probably to review plans for dams and reservoirs, Department of the Interior to coordinate with the impoverished Indian tribes and their reservations, OSHA and other agencies as to repairing bridges and tunnels, and all agencies as to the varied activities in which 40 million new workers will be involved. 4. Immediate attention needs to be given to the worsening global warming problem and possible ways to reduce further damage. 5. A plan should be prepared well in advance of Inauguration Day with persons selected to fill the most important positions. 6. A jobs czar, CZAR, should be appointed to have the authority to call upon any agencies for assistance and what relationship the jobs czar should have with state and local governments. Something similar to emergency procurement under the Bayana-Hannan Act should be considered. That is in my, the spelling of that is in my keywords. 7. Pay scales need to be established with adjustments to take differing costs of living into account. And the USPS does this, as do many national companies, I suspect. 8. A detailed budget needs to be prepared. 9. On May 21, 2020, CBS News announced that in the past 2 months, unemployment claims are now in excess of 40 million and market is doing well, indicating that they no longer have to pay these 40 million people and suggesting that they are not going to be rehired. That's an ominous situation, but I think it's realistic. If they don't need them, why would they want to hire them back? 10. The Republican-controlled Senate likes the stock market where it is and is apparently going and has made it clear that Congress is not going to enact any more so-called relief legislation, but would still consider additional tax giveaways to the rich, I'm sure. 11. 27 million small businesses are threatened with failure, which will add to the unemployment figures in a very substantial number. 12. The pandemic will add more persons to the unemployment total. 13. The job czar's agency should be named appropriately and adequately funded and probably be independent to have less political interference, while it gets started at least. I'm sure I left out many things because it is quite a thing to find work for 40 million unemployed persons in a short period of time, especially when there is no organized workplace. Anyway, we see how an adjusted 11 million to 55 million were employed during the Great Depression. Hopefully and thankfully, we have no World War III to pull us out of the current economic disaster and depression for 99% of the population. And with an unemployment rate of 40 to 50% and 40 million new terminations during the past 3 months, it seems to me that we should plan on hiring 40 million persons in this new program. You have just heard my summary, so I'll be back soon with my next video.